No, I work at for yours.
Toronto Lit Up is funded by the Toronto Arts Council and spearheaded by the Toronto International Festival of Authors. You can learn more about the program and upcoming events at festivalofauthors.ca/Toronto Lit Up. This event is also brought to you by Black Rose Books in Montreal with Another Story Bookshop. Bread Stone. William McLean is an Alberta farm boy seeking the work that he believes God has put him on earth to do. Returning from World War I in a crisis of conscience, he finds his calling when he is drawn into Winnipeg's labor movement by his army buddy Daniel Eckersley. As unrest mounts and the authorities respond with force, William finds himself in the midst of an upheaval that could mean freedom or destitution for all. In Bread and Stone, Allan Weiss skillfully combines the story of, did I mispronounce your name? I'm sorry. Weiss, there we go. Thanks, Allan. Allan Weiss skillfully combines the story of one of the most dramatic real events in Canadian history, the Winnipeg General Strike, with the spiritual journey of a young man growing to understand who he is, who he's becoming, and what it is that he must do. Allan Weiss, a fiction writer and professor of English at York University, was born in Montreal and later moved to Toronto to pursue doctoral studies after earning his BA and MA at Concordia University. He's the author of 3 story cycles, Living Room, Making the Rounds, and Telescope. His short stories have appeared in numerous anthologies and magazines, including Fiddlehead, Wisconsin Review, On Spec, and the Tesseract's anthology series. His historical novel, Bread and Stone, was published by Black Rose Books. Please give it up for the stars of the show tonight. Honey Novick is a singer, songwriter, voice teacher, and poet. She is a full member of the League of Canadian Poets, the Writers' Union of Canada, and Poetry and Voice. She has published 8 recordings and 10 chapbooks. The Stop Community Center awarded her 2024 Outstanding Neighbor and earned her 5th Gerstein Legacy Fund Award in teaching voice yoga. Her member of Provincial Parliament, Jill Andrew, nominated her for Poet Laureate of the Province of Ontario. She sings with Bill Bissett, George Elliott Clark, Kip Harness, and is an artist in residence for the Friendly Spike Theatre Band and directs Literarity and Woman Voice.
Thank you all very much. I'll give you an idea of how we're going to do things. But I wanted to start by telling you why I wanted Honey to be here. Honey is a poet, a singer, and I met her at the memorial service for Judith Merrill, science fiction writer, editor, founder of the Merrill Collection, that is part of the Toronto Public Library system. She sang a song, a labor song, that, as I found out much later, was based on a gospel song called Speak for Me. And that song became the theme song of the novel. I still hear it in my head every time I think of the book. And so I invited her to come to read a couple of her poems and also to sing the theme song before I do my reading. But before we begin, I just want to make a couple of points. First of all, I have a number of people to thank, and I will do that in a second. But I did want to point out that during the Winnipeg strike, there were people who might have starved because the truck drivers and the wagoneers, the Teamsters who were delivering milk and bread, also went out on strike. And the strike committee asked them to go out and deliver the milk, the bread, and other products. They said, if we go out there and do that, there's a really good chance we'll get beaten up as scabs. So they printed up placards to put in the trucks and on the wagons. And what I did was I printed off one of them and put it over here so that you know that I am not here as a scab, that I'm doing this reading, we are doing this reading as permitted by the strike committee. So I would like to thank, before we get started, Black Rose Books, especially Dimitri Rosopoulos, who agreed to publish the book. John Davies, Clara Swan Kennedy, J. Marquis Malcolm, and Deanna Radford, who set up this event. My greatest gratitude to all. I'd like to thank my beta readers, the Cecil Street Irregulars, the writers group that I belong to, a couple of members of whom are here, and Annalie Pekonen, who is my great friend and who made sure that I didn't muck it up as badly as I was doing. I'd like to thank Michael Dupuis, who has written extensively on the strike and provided valuable information that I didn't get out of all the books I read in order to do the research. And by the way, the research took about 20 years. All of the historians whose work I benefited from. The librarians and museum personnel who also helped me. My sister Barbara, my brother Eddie, and my sister-in-law Judy for their love and support. And I want to thank Honey for the novel's theme song. The Toronto International Festival of Authors, the Toronto Arts Council, the City of Toronto, and Julia, Eden, and the rest of the staff who are helping out here at Another Story, and all of you for attending and supporting me and the publisher and bookstore. And finally, I want to thank all those who have fought for over a century for workers' rights in Canada. So first I'd like to hand it over to Honey to read a couple of poems, and then to finish off by singing Speak for Me.
So I want to start off by introducing to you this amazing magazine. It's called First Light. It is published by the Canadian Centre for the Victims of Torture. And if anybody prays for peace, it's victims of torture, because they can truly speak on behalf of what it means when people lose their humanity. And I had the privilege, I don't know how, but through the Writers' Union, the person who directs this amazing center found me and recently published my works in this. And I said, when I got it, I said, I've never been a centerfold before. But on a more serious note, he published not only 2 pieces of poetry based on peace, but also what I wrote about my feelings for Mahsa Imani, who's the 21-year-old woman who was beaten to death in an Irani prison. The thing is, I am Canadian-born, the daughter of people from Palestine, Israel. The man who runs the center is from Iran. If there's any hope for peace, I believe it lies within us. And so he published this. But before I tell you that, I'm dying to tell you, Allan, as he said, we met each other, unfortunately, at Judy's celebration of life. Eventually, we met again on that book festival that's on Queen's Park, you know, the Festival of Words. What's it called? Word on the Street. Yeah, and he told me that his father was a concert pianist, and would I sing with him? So anyway, I went to meet him. It was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. At first, I was invited to sing in seniors' homes, and that kind of didn't do it for me. So then I invited Mr. Weiss to come and perform with me at the Free Times, and then we were in a TV show about immigrant music, and to sing with a person who is gifted, and then something happens, and that dream, it's still alive, but it's not on the front burner. And to see how that form of survival exists in the world, those people too are heroes, people who make the best of really, really dire circumstances and never forget that they too have a dream. So having said that, from the First Light, to me, peace is a river that flows incessantly, eternally through the everyday turmoil of life. It isn't judgmental or even definable. It just is. It kisses both lovers and warriors and embraces both. Peace is a goddess, an alchemist, a magician, a great hope, an eternal lamp of guiding warmth. It is an ideal that causes misunderstandings. It is a secret lit candle in a darkened cave. Peace lives in the hearts of those who desire tomorrow. To me, peace is a purpose for living, the great attainable inheritance bestowed and willed to all who seek the truth of existence, the dependent origination of interconnectedness. Peace is a song without ending, a reason to wake up each morning refreshed and ready to greet the challenges and gifts of each day. Peace is more than a yearning for no more war. Peace is more than a recognition of the serene heart. Peace is you and me and ignorance and suffering and embracing that and transforming it into a goal of cooperation. Peace walks with all who have open eyes and a caring heart. Peace sings the songs that need to be heard by all willing to listen. Peace exists amid turmoil, challenge, regret, disappointment. It is the magic carpet that transports a willing heart to seek and find new horizons and greater depths. So that's peace to me. Thank you. And it's in the centerfold. So as Eden told you, my wonderful member of provincial parliament, Jill Andrew, nominated me for Poet Laureate of Ontario. I'm just saying that because I love to say it. I don't see, I'm too scared to get into any kind of fantasy about it because it means getting out of my comfort zone. But anyway, so now she wants to read Parliament in, our current Premier's Parliament. And so she sent out a missive, a letter to all of us in her ward, her riding, to ask us to submit something that she can read in Parliament. So this is what I submitted. It's called An Ode to the Cultural Worker. The poet, the writer, the singer, the dancer, the composer, photographer, dreamer, painter, musician, seer. For you who value the cultural worker, this is for you. Cultural workers devote and most often donate their skills, products, talents, service, time, labor, and space. They document history and the continuity of society. They ponder, ruminate, question, provoke, create, and build. Then offer these gifts so that all humanity can benefit by their philosophy of possibility. Are colors important and image succinct? What people see and how society behave are very often linked. Do you care if a school child learns rhythm or team play? Can you count to 10 and then count backwards again? Hickory dickory dock, do you relate to life by punching a clock? A job well done is a person fulfilled. So who cares if cultural enrichment is instilled? I know you do. That's why you're reading this, hearing this. Culture is born of ideas, hit or miss. Culture is born by people's sweat. We can't fake it or take it for granted. We must take it in stride. We must take it with pride. The cultural worker, visible or not, is always somewhere by your side. What?
I'm going to show a few pictures behind Honey as she sings the song. If you've read the novel, some of them will look familiar. And all of them reflect that period that I'm writing about. So, and I'd like you to sing along. You'll catch on fairly quickly how the words go. Okay.
Okay. May the work that I have done speak for me. That's all you need to know. Repeat. May the work that I have done speak for me. If I should fall short of my goals, someone else will take a hold, and the work that I have done will speak for take a hold, and the marches I've been on will speak for me. May the work that I have done speak for me. May the work that I have done speak for me. If I should fall short of my goals, someone else will take a hold, and the work that I have done will speak for me. Speak for me. Thank you.
This, by the way, is Bob Russell, who appears in the novel. And there are a few other images that I did want to show you. But by the way, I might go back to Mr. Russell. There were a couple of major confrontations during the strike, and these are images of some of those confrontations. And you'll recognize that streetcar from the cover of the book, which became the center of a major confrontation toward the climax of the strike. There is a theme in the novel, doing nothing. And if I can, I'd like to go back to Mr. Russell because he says something really significant that helped me to understand just exactly what my character would be going through. And that's how the title of the book came about. We asked for bread and received a stone. And that's from the Sermon on the Mount. So, now it was hard for you to hear, but what he's saying is that do nothing. And basically do nothing to provoke martial law, he says at one point. In any case, one of the things that William wrestles with is the idea of doing nothing, whether he feels that he has done nothing, and the degree to which the strike committee told him, do nothing. Okay, I'm going to read a short passage. Now, you know the phrase from the sublime to the ridiculous? You heard Honey singing. That's the sublime end of the spectrum. You're going to hear a little bit of me doing something similar, and that's when things will get really ridiculous. In any case, during the strike, the veterans who were in support of the strikers marched down major streets in Winnipeg, and that's how they showed their support. This is one of those marches that William participates in. And I confirmed this with Michael Dupuis, who I referred to earlier, that they would sing army songs. Eckersley, as you'll recall, is his friend who draws him into the strike. And then he also has friends of his who are surrounding him as he's marching. They were nearly 1,000 strong, William guessed, almost all of them in their 20s and perhaps 30s, dressed in dark suits, gray summer suits, uniforms, and every kind and shade of cap or hat. They wore their war service buttons. Some had medals pinned to their breast pockets. Even at this early hour, the air was hot, but a heavy haze blurred the sun. William took off his cap, wiped his forehead with his sleeve, and squeezed through the crowd, searching for his chums. He saw Eckersley standing in the heart of it, arms crossed. The meeting was called to order just as he reached Eckersley's spot, and Eckersley acknowledged him with a nod. Jack Moore and Roger Bray spoke like lieutenants in the field reviewing their company's objectives. Bray explained that the politicians were debating whether to pass a law making collective bargaining compulsory, but they were having trouble coming up with a definition of collective bargaining. "Where's the mystery, Roger?" someone in the crowd asked. "I don't know, they're politicians, eh?" Many of the men laughed. "Sounds like they're stalling." "Yeah, even they can't be that stupid." "We're going to visit Premier Norris to get him to pass that law," Moore said. "And we're going to get him to push the city on their bloody ultimatums." By this point, they had issued ultimatums to the phone operators and to the police, saying that they were not going to be allowed to strike or they would be fired. The men applauded. William joined in. But what Moore and Bray were saying seemed like a pipe dream. Still, it was worth a try. How could Norris not listen to them? Both Bray and Moore told them the same things. Be calm. Be peaceful. Show the politicians and the people of Winnipeg what the returned men were made of. If William knew anything, it was how to march. "All right, boys," Bray cried. "Form fours." He and Moore climbed down from the platform while marshals, ex-sergeants and lieutenants, maneuvered the men into columns of 4 abreast. "Come on, you know the drill. You know how it's done." It didn't take him long to find Porter, Bagley, Quinn, and some other men whom he'd met the night before. They formed ranks near the front of the column. "Elite company, eh?" Porter asked. "Of course," William answered. About a dozen policemen stood at the south end of Market Square waiting to escort them. The badges on the front of their helmets glittered as they chatted and shared laughs with each other or the marshals. Bray and Moore wound through the column to take up positions at the front. "Keep it orderly," Bray called out. "Over the top now, eh, boys?" someone shouted, and they laughed. "A few more Huns to take care of." "Kaisers, you mean." "Okay, boys. Let's show 'em. March!" At Moore's command, they marched along William Street. He thought of it for a moment as his own, like Hamilton's banks. Past the towering Union Bank building to Main. They turned right, and at Main Street resounded with the clomp clomp of boots and shoes. People on the sidewalks stopped and watched. The old songs, either whistled or sung, rose from scattered groups in the column. "Mademoiselle from Armentières, parlez-vous? Mademoiselle from Armentières, parlez-vous? Mademoiselle from Armentières, she hasn't been kissed for 40 years. Hinky-dinky, parlez-vous?" As the men moved down the middle of Main, they kept in step as best they could, given the obstacles of streetcar tracks and safety islands, mounds of horse crap and piles of wind-blown trash. They passed Ashdown's Hardware with the A on its sign enclosed in a diamond. Eckersley loved to make fun of that design because Ashdown was one of the richest men in the city, and the diamond was a perfect symbol for him. "Sing it out, boyo," Eckersley shouted beside him. "The Colonel got the croix de guerre, parlez-vous? The Colonel got the croix de guerre, parlez-vous? The Colonel got the croix de guerre, the son of a gun was never there. Hinky-dinky, parlez-vous?" Bagley marched on his other side, swinging his lone arm in proper time to his feet, his Homburg pushed back on his head. Porter was beyond him in a gray cap and blue suit. Quinn, wiser than many, had worn a straw boater, although now it seemed that clouds were building and there was the smell of a coming thunderstorm in the air. He slid his unlit cigar into his jacket pocket. Beyond Bannatyne, they marched between the high bank buildings on both sides, the Royal Bank, Banque d'Hochelaga, Bank of Hamilton. And that damn plaster pool player continued to overlook the street, advertising the Victoria Pool Hall. People out doing whatever shopping they could, or out for strolls, lined up along the sidewalks, and some applauded or waved their hats. Under a drugstore awning, a little girl in a brilliant white pinafore clung to her mother's arm with both hands, eyes wide as she stared at them. The stone and brick buildings hung over the men. Most of the tall, narrow windows were blank, but some squeaked open and men and women poked their heads out to watch. Mademoiselle from Armentières, parlez-vous? Mademoiselle from Armentières, parlez-vous? She got the palm and the croix de guerre for washing a soldier's underwear. Hinky-dinky, parlez-vous? Keep her clean, kids. There's keep her clean, boys. There's kids. They'd have to be careful with the song now. It was getting to the rough parts. But they sang out the parts they dared as loudly as they could. He wanted them all to hear it. Mademoiselle from Armentières, parlez-vous? Mademoiselle from Armentières, parlez-vous? Where are the girls who used to swarm about me in my uniform? Hinky-dinky, parlez-vous? A huge crowd gathered as they neared Portage, and some of the spectators even joined in the song. It was strange. He'd passed these buildings 3 years ago, but he couldn't connect the two Winnipegs. Yet the height of the stores and the size of the crowds were familiar, the way the place sounded and felt as he marched down the middle of the street, those massive brick and stone buildings, more people in one place than he'd ever seen before. A sea of black and gray hats, white boaters, flowered and feathered ladies' hats, parasols. But now the excitement was different. Now he wasn't shy to be seen. He wanted them to see him. He wanted hundreds, thousands of faces turned his way. No one from the crowd joined them in the street. No kids ran out to play soldier with them this time. But many, even those who had to walk their bicycles, tracked them from the sidewalk, keeping pace beyond the police phalanx as the men maintained their steady gait and held their heads erect. Mademoiselle from Armentières, parlez-vous? Mademoiselle from Armentières, parlez-vous? You might forget the gas and shell, but you'll never forget the mademoiselle. Hinky-dinky, parlez-vous? They turned west on Portage, past the post office and the Dome Bank of Nova Scotia building, past Eaton's store, which was operating thanks to scabs. A row of their blue and red trucks was lined up beside it like horses at a trough. As they marched past the Builders Exchange building, at the corner of Hargrave, Eckersley made an obscene gesture and William poked him with an elbow. "Remember where you are," he said. "Yeah, sorry, ladies." They turned down Kennedy, marched past across Broadway with its vast treed boulevard. As they neared the legislature, they passed a half-built white structure, the biggest and most elegant building William had ever seen in Canada. Couldn't take his eyes off it. "Billy," Eckersley said in his ear, "look at it over there. Our new legislative building." Its stones gleamed through the trees planted before it. Its rows of windows were like giant eyeless sockets. A central tower rose from the midst of all that white. "That's your profiteering there. Do you know what it cost to build that while we wore shoddy? Do you know how much money they found to put into that palace? Well, they gave us goddamn Ross rifles." "I was over there when all that was going on," Quinn said. "It's a goddamn crime. Roblin had to resign over it. Kickbacks, bribes, the whole 9 yards," Eckersley said. "What a beautiful place they're building with workers' money and soldiers' blood to make the rich richer, sons of goddamn bitches. Come on." From Kennedy, they marched up the curving drive in front of the legislature, past the statue of Queen Victoria, who sat grandly on her marble throne. Nothing would stop them. They walked right in and confront Norris right where he worked. He couldn't refuse to see them or listen to them. They simply wouldn't let him get away. People stared as they climbed the steps of the looming building, the men in front pressing forward through the high arching doors and up the dozen or so steps into the dim entrance hall beyond. All whipped off their hats as soon as they could get their arms free to do it. They passed through the archway to the bright lobby and headed down the corridor to their left with its rows of portraits of swells. They kept going past the security guards, past the secretaries and the officials who had to step aside to let them through. And I'll stop there. Thank you. Thanks. Questions? Anybody have questions?
I have a question. Where did your interest to write about that event? How, where, what, how did it begin?
How did my interest in writing about this event start? There were a few things. First of all, ever since I was writing as a kid, I've had an interest in beliefs, in ideas, in what it means to believe in something, and then be confronted with challenges to that belief. And so I was looking for a theme in Canadian history, or an event in Canadian history rather, that reflected that idea of people finding themselves with very strong assumptions and beliefs that are then challenged. And I can tell you I experienced that when I was researching the strike. And what happens to my main character is that he goes to fight in World War I with very strong ideas about why he was going and what he was going to do there. And then all of that gets exploded. And some of the same things happen when he comes back to Canada and to Winnipeg. And the other side of it was I wanted to find an event in history that encompassed a lot of those ideas, but that hadn't been done to death. World War I had been done to death. Timothy Finley wrote, the wars, I mean, you can't do better. World War II, the Riel rebellions, so many events in Canadian history had already been done. But to my astonishment, there had never been a detailed historical novel about the Winnipeg strike. Another thing that I was thinking was that the 2000s have seen an outburst of new voices from racialized minorities, gendered minorities, from women, you name it. But there hadn't been too much on labor history in Canadian fiction. And so I thought there's a gap that needs filling. We haven't seen a lot of fiction. We have seen some, but not a lot of fiction about labor history, about the working class in Canada, about that part of Canada's history that often gets forgotten. This seemed to bring everything together. Any other questions? Yeah.
Can you elaborate on what you said that you discovered some things as you were writing? Can you elaborate?
Okay.
A little bit.
Yeah. One of my assumptions was that the strike committee was fairly unified. As it turned out, they were made up of people from all kinds of different positions. Some of them were just trade unionists, said, we're here to get a better deal for the metal trades workers who started all of this. They were the ones who launched their strike, and other people went out in sympathy. There were other people who were there in order to start the revolution. And there were people all along that spectrum. Meanwhile, I had thoughts about the soldiers probably being from the working classes and therefore being largely sympathetic to the strike. Wrong. It was pretty evenly divided. So that was part of what I was talking about in terms of one thing that really became clear as I was writing the novel and learning more about World War I and the strike. Your beliefs are being challenged. But one of those beliefs is, whose side are you on? Whose side are they on? And so throughout the novel, I play with the idea of not knowing who's supposed to be on your side and whose side are you supposed to be on. And so when, you know, that famous scene about the German soldiers coming over during Christmas and everybody hanging out in no man's land, drinking together. You're not supposed to do that. They're the people you're trying to kill. And there they are doing that kind of thing. And so it's never completely clear who's on whose side. And this is something that I learned more and more as I was researching the strike and writing the novel. And that's something that William needs to learn. So basically, one of the things he has to discover is, who are his people? And one way that I do that is by talking about brotherhood. See, William is very heavily influenced by the social gospel, which teaches about Christian brotherhood. So he's got a brother, a biological brother, but he's also got other brothers, his fellow soldiers, and then the people in the strike, the workers. And so there's one point early on in the novel when he joins the army and his sergeant major says, "You got a brother? He's not your brother. Look to your left, look to your right, look around you. These are your brothers now." And so he has to figure out who his brothers are, who his family is, and it changes as he goes along. Yeah.
When did the strike start? When did
Okay,
it
yeah.
finish?
Okay.
How did it get resolved?
Pretty basic questions, yeah. Okay, it started in the middle of May of 1919, and it ended on June 21st. So it was about 6 weeks, during which the city of Winnipeg shut down. One of the stupidest things that the city did during the strike, I told you about those ultimatums. They issued an ultimatum to the police saying that you must not go on a sympathy strike, and you must sign this pledge that you will not go on a sympathy strike, or we will fire you. And the police response was, we know what kind of chaos will result if we go on a sympathy strike. We do not intend to go on a sympathy strike. But we're also not going to sign that pledge, because as British subjects, we have the right to demonstrate, and we have the right to go on strike, and we will not surrender that right, even though we don't plan to exercise it. And one of the headlines that I have early on, you're not going to come back, are you? But anyway, when they wouldn't sign the pledge on June 9th, 1919, the city fired the entire police force and replaced them with special police. And you saw the badge, the armband that they wore, and the baton that they would carry around. So these were essentially, and one of the things I thought initially was that these were just goons that they had picked off the street. No, many of them were veterans who said, we fought the Huns and the Bolsheviks and all the rest of them overseas. Now we have to fight them in Winnipeg. So we're going to join the special police to fight those bastards who are bringing all these European alien ideas to Winnipeg. So anyway, it ended on June 21st, which is known as Bloody Saturday for a reason. And then you'll read the novel and find out. And by the way, it isn't simply what happens in this strike. It's also William's own personal journey seeking redemption. But I won't go into detail about that.
Hi.
Olga, hi.
So great to be here.
Thank you.
I got the book. I can't wait to read it. But I wanted to ask you, since you mentioned the Bolsheviks, to what extent, because you talked about complexity, not knowing, what ideology, who you were in fact following, right? Whose ideas you were committed to. To what extent did the revolution in Russia, I don't know if you do, I'm just wondering whether you deal with this in the novel. How did it affect the strike?
Yeah, many of them were, the strike leaders were influenced by the Russian Revolution. They said that's the start. Then came other places. Hungary, the Seattle General Strike was the most immediate influence. That happened just before. And there were things happening in Hungary, Germany, throughout Europe. So all of these were influential on some of the people who were leading the strike, on the strike committee. And
And it was a time when the Russian Revolution looked really positive. It was brief. And people say, well, it was Stalin who turned it into a dictatorship. No, Lenin started it. And you just have to look at what the writers said about Lenin and what he was doing to them. But Russia was decaying toward Tsarism, because that's what happens in countries that have revolutions. They tend to revert back to the original way that things were. But it hadn't quite happened yet, so people were still pretty optimistic, and they took inspiration from the Russian Revolution and other political events happening in Europe and in the United States. The thing that's really interesting, you want to talk about disinformation and you want to talk about fake news. The strike leaders were portrayed as foreigners, as aliens. Most of them were British trade unionists who had immigrated to Canada and were bringing beliefs from England and Scotland, like Bob Russell with that lovely accent of his, to Canada. We did it over there, and we're going to do it over here. Yeah, Dave?
So I just wondered if you were willing to speak to the surprising or expected differences in the writing process you found from first having written fantasy works or sci-fi works, and then now historical fiction.
I don't see a huge difference because I focus on character in my science fiction, fantasy, and science fiction, fantasy, realist fiction. My first book was a realist work, short stories about a Jewish kid growing up in Montreal. Hello. And so when I go back and forth across that divide, I take things with me. And the research, I've been working on this series of hard science fiction stories. I've got to do a lot of research for that. I've had to do a lot of research for my scholarly work. And I had to do a lot of research for this. And it was all the same. I know how to use a library. I don't know as well as I used to because of all this high-tech stuff. Where's the card catalog? I'm used to doing this with a card catalog. But it was the same process, and it's just I'm using different genres, or writing in different genres. But it's, to my mind, the same process, and I've discovered this with other writers, the same themes. Because I write about belief and challenges to belief in most of what I write. Yeah.
So, as you were in the middle of all of the research, did you then have your attention sort of geared towards the current labor movement in terms of differences, and could you comment on how that affected your mind?
I was looking at things happening today. I was looking at other movements happening today. So that when I read that the women who were marching down Main Street in support of the strike, when I read that they were chanting equal pay for equal work in 1919, I thought, oh, right. This has been going on for 100 years. There were very distinct similarities. And there are always certain things that recur. You know, that line about history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And I have to say that sometimes I was kind of smug about things because I thought, yeah, okay, this is what happened in the past. I bet you that happens to those people. So, for example, when during the 90s, when we were hearing about people spending 12, 14 hours a day at the office and thinking that this was what they were supposed to do because they'd been told Like, just read Douglas Copeland. They'd been told that if you don't do that, you're not a real worker and you don't have any devotion to the company, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I said, one day those people are going to get seriously pissed off, like the workers back in the 19th and early 20th centuries, about having 10-hour, 12-hour workdays. They're demanding 8 hours a day max. And then they want overtime after that. And then in recent decades, I heard about work-life balance. Hello. I knew that was going to happen. You're going to devote yourself to your company up to a point, and then you're going to say, wait a minute, you're paying me a salary, and I will get that salary if I work 8 hours a day or 12? I don't want to be on email 12 hours a day. I don't want to wake up to that thing beeping at me. And so I saw the same kind of thing happening 100 years later. Any other questions?
Well, I kind of have two. So one, say, in retrospect, 10 years after that strike, the setting of your story, did it affect the rest of Canada?
Did it ever?
And I suppose we should know that.
No. I can't tell you how many people I've asked about the Winnipeg strike and they've never heard of it, or they know very little about it. And that was one reason I wanted to write the book. It had profound effects. William works for the Labor newspaper. And the editor was changed, for reasons you'll see, to J.S. Woodsworth, who later went on to found the CCF and then the NDP, which became the NDP. And I had this vision in my mind about what the film would be like of this novel. You would see who they were in 1919, and then you would have a little bit, and this is at the end, you would find out what happened to them. One of them becomes the mayor of Winnipeg. Other people become members of the Legislative Assembly or other things like that. And the labor movement would not be stopped. And a lot of what you saw in the 20s and 30s, especially during the Depression, grew out of the Winnipeg strike. And you talk to people today, and I've spoken to people who had relatives involved. Oh yeah, my grandfather was in that. You talk to people in Winnipeg, you will still hear stories. It had a profound effect on Canadian history. The government was scared silly that the revolution was about to happen, starting in Winnipeg. And so there were changes made to the way they approached certain things. Did you have that second one?
Well, it's totally different. It's just the battle I always end up in union talk versus non-union talk when you're in a setting of people. And it's like the whole reason our society is the way it is because union rights and union things that are won, all the other people are trying to keep up with that. Or it would be the lowest common denominator. And yet people think union bad, union bad, union bad. And it's like the whole reason we have weekends are union. The whole reason we have lunch hours are union. The whole reason for the way
Medicare.
9 to 5. Everything. And yet people will put it down. It's like, well, you're fine taking the pension that your union got. You're fine taking the stipend for your lunch that your union got. Or the union of a parallel company. Like
right.
When the nurses are the union, but then the like St. Eliz and the independent home care ones didn't have a union, but they tried to keep the benefits the same.
That's right. There were so many ways in which Canadian society has benefited from the work of union leaders that people don't even realize. And the old line, you don't know what you got till it's gone. I hope you people realize, and by you people, I mean the Canadian people, I hope you realize what you have before it's gone.
Well, it's a bit like what's happening right now in some of the professions is it's a new crop of workers and they don't realize, teachers, for example, like the teachers have lost so much that was fought for, and they don't even realize it because they're all new. So they don't realize what it used to be like 5 years ago.
Exactly.
And now they're like, well, sort of questioning stuff. Like, well, you guys kind of let it go.
Yeah.
And other fields.
I could say a few things about the good old days, but I won't. But I do tell.
But I don't mean the good old days. I mean like last year.
Yeah. I tell my students when I would teach, especially utopian, dystopian literature or science fiction or anything of that sort, particularly when it's from a feminist point of view. You're all sitting here, you women, in my class. You wear whatever you want. You're not obliged to wear dresses. And then I go through a whole list of other things that used to be normal. And they've all changed in my lifetime. And these kids were born after that. So they don't understand. They take for granted those changes. And that's kind of what I was talking about in terms of beliefs. We take things for granted. They weren't always so. So we have to be really careful. But yeah, the changes that have taken place, thanks to all of this, are profound and easily lost.
I mean, look at the Taliban coming in. It can be so fast.
Yeah. I could cite closer examples, but I won't.
Yes.
Okay, how are we doing? I'm okay, but...
Well, just a comment, like 100 years ago, people were saying marching down the women's rights and equal work, equal pay.
That's right.
People don't learn from history. Maybe they will with your book, as it's a novel.
Okay, let's hope so.
Instead of just theory.
Whoops. Any other questions?
Did you go to Winnipeg when you wrote it?
Not only did I go to Winnipeg, I did the marches myself. I experienced, at one point, and this may have been the most fun portion of the novel to write, the soldiers marched through the rich part of town just to show it to the wealthy. The Committee of 1,000. And the rich part of town was the south end. The working class neighborhood was the north end. They went to the south end, which is right near the river, which is where the bird-sized mosquitos are. And I did that march. And fortunately, the mosquitoes weren't as bad when I was there as it was for the soldiers, the veterans rather, who marched there. But I said, oh yeah, okay, I see. Yeah, I did all those marches. Oh, I got to tell you the spooky bit. Because this is my favorite part of the research. I told you that William works for the labor newspaper. And the editor says, go out and find out what's going on. And it says, well, the streetcars are on strike. And you can't get any other kind of transportation. I'm going to need a car. So the editor says, okay, I'll get you a car. And then I don't know how long after that I went to Winnipeg and I worked in the Manitoba archives, and they had the notebooks from the strike committee meetings. And there were these long things, right? Long, thin notebooks done in pencil. Now, the newspaper was the Western Labor News, the WLN. So I'm flipping through the notebooks. Editor of LN asks for car. Granted. Okay. It's perfectly logical. But it was still a little spooky to see that. Yeah. Yes.
is just about the same time.
Yep.
Overlapping. Do you bring that in?
Yes. And you know how it got to Canada? Our own soldiers. That's what I was saying about who's on whose side. The most horrifying thing you could imagine as a soldier then, actually, one of the many things was what was called a short. When the artillery behind you fires a shell and it lands in your own trench. It's horrifying for you because you don't see it coming. You can't anticipate it. And imagine what it was like for the artillerymen who fired that cannon and killed their own men. Whose side are you on? You know, like that's what happens in conflicts like this. Everything gets very blurry.
So you think they knowingly brought the Spanish flu in?
Oh no.
Oh, okay.
Oh no, no,
I thought you
no.
were making it like they brought it in and that's why you don't know whose side they're on because they did it on purpose.
Oh no, no, no. They would not have done it on purpose. No, it was just a matter of we're dying because of our soldiers. Just like we had, for example, with COVID. I mean, a kid would go to school, catch COVID, bring it home and give it to grandpa, you know, and ooh. So it's that kind of thing where you're getting hurt by your own side. That's what I mean about everything just going crazy. There's an old line in military strategy, you know, your plans, I forget the line, but your plans survive as long, right up until the point when you actually meet the enemy. And then all hell breaks loose. So good luck planning anything.
What was the trigger at the very, very beginning
Of what?
of the strike?
The Metal Trades Union were negotiating a contract, and they would have different shops, metal shops. And the workers said, we want to be represented not by our own local person, but by a bigger union. The Metal Trades Council, I think. This is all, it's gotten fuzzy for me too. But, and the people running the shop said, we will negotiate, but not with an outsider. We'll only negotiate shop by shop. And the workers said, we want to be represented by who we want to be represented by. You can't tell us who represents us. So we're all going out. And when they went out, the others went out in sympathy. So it was a sympathy strike. And that's how things spread. And there's a scene that I did have a lot of fun writing as well, where they're counting the votes from the various other unions, the non-metal unions, about going out on sympathy strikes. This one says yes. That one says yes. That other one says yes. Everybody pretty much said yes. So the whole city one morning, boom. And the hello girls, as they were known then, the telephone operators, when they went out, imagine that. Like we freak out if our cell phones don't work. Here, all communication is cut off. And I had to put myself in the head of somebody who is in 1919, okay, there are no cell phones. Not everybody has a phone. How are they going to get any kind of communication with each other? And now, I mean, when the telephone operators went out, there was a fair bit of chaos. But again, when the people who delivered bread and milk and ice, hot days, you need ice for your ice box. When they went out, you just imagine what kinds of things went out. Yeah, sure.
So a few years ago, when Ford tried to use the notwithstanding clause against the education workers, there was a lot of talk about general strike.
Yeah.
And we seemed like we were on the verge of one. And if you spend any time on Reddit or other places like that on the internet, you hear a lot of talk about general strike.
Yep.
but we haven't seen anything like the Winnipeg General Strike in Canada. So what's changed? How likely is such a thing to ever happen again?
What's changed is that unionization has decreased because of the collapse of the industrial sector in Canada, as we're producing more goods overseas. Unions are weaker and smaller, but they've kind of built back up in the last couple of years. So who's unionized? Public sectors. But the people working in your office, people working at home now, good luck trying to get them unionized. It's been much harder to get people unionized or to stay in unions, given the changing nature of the workforce. So you're going to see a lot less of that kind of mass action.
Such a large part of the workforce is contract workers.
Exactly. That's the
big.
That's the newer thing.
People are so apathetic, though. They just want everyone else to take care of them. Didn't in the last 2 months, and I may be very wrong in this, but was there not just a Walmart unionized in Winnipeg?
Was it? Yeah. Okay. But they're doing it shop by shop, right?
It's like the first one.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
deal, but I don't know if I have all the facts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just a little here and a little there and a little there. And, people at the Amazon warehouse, this one might unionize, but that doesn't mean the other one does. It's that kind of thing, right? So it's very, very fragmented.
But we were confident that your book will.
Oh yeah, this will change Canada and the world. Yes, it makes a great Christmas present, because nothing says I honor the birth of my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ like a book about the Winnipeg strike. But that's it. Written by a Jew. You got it.
Can you sign some books for us now?
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. Let's turn this off.
I am running off, but it was so lovely seeing you.
Oh.
Congrats on the book. I'm so excited to read it.
Oh, thank you. You want it signed?
I would love it signed, but I have an ebook version. So.
Oh, that's right. You have the ebook. I forgot. I could sign that. I could sign your with a glass cutter or something.
Yeah, I don't buy anything on paper these days unless I make it myself. So,
Okay.
But I do it. So.
Well, thanks for coming. Thanks for getting a copy, and
Thanks for
it was good seeing you again.
All right, take care.
You too.